All right. So here's another one where the choices to put these two together probably seems super random. As usual, this was your call,
Hmm.
but we learned, especially with stuff like Zoolander and Dodgeball, when we put those together, it's like even when they sound like they don't go together, the more you talk about them, the more they kind of do.
And I think this is one of those where audience and critical reaction is polar on
Yeah,
these two.
I want to say Talladega Nights got decent critical acclaim, but critics despise basketball.
Yeah. Doesn't like Trey Parker even despise basketball?
It wouldn't surprise me. Yeah, because it's one of those things where it's like when you watch it and because that was the marketing, was that it's the South Park guys, only they're in a movie now. There's even a joke about that in the movie.
Hmm.
But the thing is they pretty much had, as far as I know, they had nothing to do with the writing whatsoever.
Hmm.
Like hardly even cases of like improv. Like there's a couple of moments where Trey Parker uses like his Mr. Garrison voice and his Carmen voice,
Hmm.
but as far as I know, they had nothing to do with the writing at all.
Which is funny because there's a lot of times where their delivery is spot on.
Yeah, but it is the case where I wonder if they just kind of did the movie
Hmm.
and didn't really think about that, or if it was they had faith because it was like Zucker and where he comes from, and that it was going to be in the style of Airplane and stuff like that.
Yeah.
They could have just had faith, but I honestly have no idea.
I don't know.
And the reason these got put together was that we had talked about we wanted to talk about them individually. We just didn't know what to put them with. Like Talladega Nights and Days of Thunder kept getting brought up, but it was like, no, tonally that's way off. And with basketball, we had no idea because it's an invented game, and it's like, to
But
basketball's credit, how many movies are like that?
but it's kind of funny though because Days of Thunder and Talladega Nights probably do have more in common than you think. Because if you think about it, Ricky Bobby kind of becomes like Michael Rooker's character.
And so I was watching them back, and it was like I started to see some things. First of all, one thing where it might not be seem like it's tonally right is that Talladega Nights is like a straight comedy,
Hmm.
whereas basketball is in that Airplane style where it's almost like a spoof
Yeah.
of what you can never quite tell. Like there's the moment at the end when the lights are exploding as he's running the bases, which is clearly the end of The Natural.
Hmm.
But that's like it's not really a specific spoof of a particular movie. It's just random shit thrown in there, like the Braveheart reference and stuff like that.
Hmm.
But it's got that same style of humor, like the way over the top humor that a spoof has.
Yeah. Which
But
a lot of that comes from Squeak.
yeah, but it was really interesting because when you compare that humor and you say Talladega Nights is a straight comedy and baseball goes more of like the more over the top spoof sort of thing. Talladega Nights, interestingly enough, seems just a tiny bit more committed to the comedy
Hmm.
because baseball actually has moments where like the plot has a serious turn and it tries to have a heartwarming moment where Joey says, Miss Reed says I should grow up to be just like you, and actually plays the sentimental music, and there's no comedy interrupts this. Anytime we get any scene like that in Talladega Nights, there's always comedy there.
Yeah.
Like if anything, it shoots itself down when it tries to do something like that. So I thought it was really weird that you could say basketball is the more over the top spoof like comedy, yet Talladega Nights is the one that sticks to the comedy most.
It's more consistent.
Not to say basketball is riddled with moments where it tries to be serious. There's only like a couple, like the couple I mentioned. It's pretty much it.
Hmm.
But it's surprising because you have moments like when they're fighting on the Malaka board,
Hmm.
and it's a serious moment that's cut off by Squeak getting catapulted across the stadium. And you would think all of the serious moments would be like that, but no, there are a couple where they try to actually make it a serious moment, and it's like it doesn't belong.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that Talladega Nights actually goes the full mile with stuff like that and doesn't let the sentimentality ever come into it without there being a joke somewhere.
Yeah.
It's like I almost feel like in basketball they would have actually kept the moment where Reese at the end goes to get the tickets, and that would have been it.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, Talladega Nights thinks he's going to scalp him.
Yeah. But it fits more with his character.
Yeah. So that's what I kind of like. There's much more of a balance there than you would think in regards to baseball seeming like a more, spoof like thing. But then there's also the similar plot thread of the sport in question.
Mm-hmm.
It starts with two best friends starting off in their childhood, and they go into that sport together, and then ultimately end up rivals in a way.
Mm-hmm.
It is a similar plot thread. Then there's stuff that just started to occur to me, like both their climatic sporting event, both movies end their climatic sporting event with an unconventional kiss that lasts for a very long time.
Yeah. And what's also funny too is when the other friend becomes a rival, it's not with malice. They become a rival because they're just too stupid to realize they've become a rival.
Especially with Cal just trying to be Ricky's friend still, like nothing.
Yeah.
And here's one that's a little. I didn't even think about it when we went into this, but it's weirdly specific.
Mm-hmm.
Two different people, but both movies have an Earnhardt cameo.
Yeah.
So yeah, sometimes they have something that specific in common, and this is just to clear the air for the people that are like, why the hell did you put these two together? That's what Owen asked me when I told him what the next one was. I was like, I think there's a little more than you, and we'll probably find more as we go through them. So that's what happens. But even though basketball came first, I figured we'd start with Talladega Nights.
Okay.
Just kind of work our way in. So, what are your general thoughts on Talladega Nights?
Talladega Nights, like, to me, Will Ferrell comedies have a problem with aging. Although there are a few that escape this, Zoolander being one, Anchorman for another. For me, for a lot of people, Anchorman got dated because it got quoted everywhere, but revisiting it years later, it's kind of found its charm again because all the quotes stopped. And the only meme now that I see consistently regarding Talladega Night or Anchorman is that escalated really quickly, and the 60% of the time it works every time, which work great as memes. And Talladega Nights is
I love that escalated quickly meme has gone so far. You could just post that picture now without the words.
Yeah.
And people get it.
And I think Talladega Nights is the other one that has escaped poor aging. Now,
Yeah,
the way, and it's kind of funny because the way that they treat Jean Girard when he first comes in, treats him like an outsider, you think would be dated, but I think now may be more relevant than ever.
because it's shown that it's the whole point throughout the entire movie is that he's smarter than them.
Yeah. Like, he even calls out, like, they love their little shake and bake catchphrase. And at one point, he's like, it's nonsense. I think Girard actually becomes outraged about it. It's one of the few times he loses his cool.
Yeah. Before we continue with the Jean Girard thing, I need to interject real quick before we piss everybody off.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, Step Brothers is very, very beloved.
Yeah.
I don't care for Step Brothers. That's why it hasn't come up yet.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why when we were speaking of Will Ferrell movies from 2008, another reason we aren't doing the obvious Talladega Nights versus Semi-Pro because it's two Will Ferrell sports movies. Blades of Glory came up also, but
Mm-hmm.
I just don't like Semi-Pro. That's why we didn't do it. We did come up with Blades of Glory, but then it was like, but then I feel like we'll never do basketball, so let's do basketball while we can.
I kind of feel like, and I could be wrong here, I kind of feel like Talladega Nights is to Will Ferrell sports movies what Happy Gilmore is to Adam Sandler sports movies.
Yeah, that sounds all right.
Except Adam Sandler does have one exception. I do enjoy Adam Sandler's Longest Yard.
Yeah. I haven't seen it for a while, but I remember liking it.
Yeah, I caught it on TV not too long ago, and I was like, yeah, this holds up pretty decent. But it's got a really nice cast to go with it too.
Yeah. And before we get too sidetracked, go back to the Jean Girard thing.
Hmm.
And you were talking about how those jokes actually work, and they don't come off as like what's the word? I was looking for another word besides offensive, but I lost it now.
Hmm.
But it's maybe tone deaf is what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
But the thing about that is, I also noticed that the gay jokes that they actually do are actually funny, and that plays a huge part in whether that's going to work or not. If the joke is funny, then it's there, and the two come to mind.
Okay. I wonder if the
One
one
is,
I'm thinking of is one of your two.
well, the first one's very simple, so simple that it shouldn't be as funny as it is. It's just when they're doing the Speed Channel's doing the special on him at his home,
Yeah.
and he owns horses who are also gay, and that's and then of course the sitting on the pole
Yeah, that's the one I was thinking of.
because it's in the background.
Uh-huh.
We're going into another. He's pulling in, and we're going into another scene, and you just have to listen to the announcer in the background say, which, by the way, is not in any way a wordplay on his sexual orientation. It is. While we're on the topic of Sacha Baron Cohen, there is something else these movies have in common that kind of blows your mind when you think about it.
Hmm.
When you combine the casts of Talladega Nights and BASEketball,
Hmm.
you will find 7 Oscar nominees, one of which is a winner. And Talladega Nights has 4 of them. John C. Reilly, Michael Clark Duncan, Amy Adams, and Sacha Baron Cohen are all Oscar nominees that appear in this movie.
I forgot Sacha Baron Cohen got nominated.
Yep, because Borat got a screenplay nomination, which was also the first nomination for Todd Phillips.
Hmm.
And then we'll get into the others when we get to BASEketball. But and of course the director Adam McKay, and all he does is Oscar movies now. He's got one himself.
Mm-hmm.
And so that kind of shows you, like, it seems weird in retrospect that Adam McKay would go on to be an Oscar-winning writer and director,
Mm-hmm.
nominated director, who has 2 movies that are picture nominees. But it's like when he did a comedy so well with this and Anchorman, and as many people think, Step Brothers.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Is it that surprising? Because talent is clearly here, and the way this movie is put together, as well as it is.
Who ones you mentioned? The 4 Oscar nominees again?
John C. Reilly, Michael Clark Duncan, Amy Adams.
Okay, for some reason I thought you left off Michael Clark Duncan. Which Michael Clark Duncan in this movie is responsible for a line that you see a lot in other places too. When someone mentions something's bad that's going to happen, I usually see a thread responded with, "Don't you put that evil on me, Ricky Bobby."
I've used that gif a number of times.
It's very prevalent in the wrestling community, like message boards, because somebody will think of something terrible WWE might do, and that's always the response.
Another one is actually a tiny bit misquoted.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know why, but I think it's the same sentiment, but I feel like the slightly different wording in the actual movie is funnier.
Mm-hmm.
It's the I don't know what to do with my hands.
Funny story about that. Susan was in a commercial for her social work program, and we were watching Talladega Nights one day, and she was like, "That's a real thing." She said, "I didn't know what to do with my hands, and they kept coming up." So Susan has actually lived Ricky Bobby's life there for a minute.
And talking about the
she said they had to give her a ball so she wouldn't raise her hands up. She had to concentrate on holding the ball.
I do love how that's what we're talking about, the over-the-top humor, where Talladega Nights, while not a spoof-like movie like Airplane,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes has humor that is over the top enough to fit in that. Like the fact that he does just blatantly do this. And the wording I was talking about was I think the meme is I don't know what to do with my hands.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why I think it's funnier. In the actual movie, he says, I'm not sure what to do with my hands.
And he
I
says
don't
it
know
like
why.
he says it mid interview, like they're live when he says it. But I think for me, there's a lot of funny characters and a lot of funny people in Talladega Nights. But for me, one of the things that always keeps me coming back is John C. Reilly as
Yeah.
Cal Naughton.
And there's one scene in particular I want to talk about with him.
Okay.
We talk about the style of humor of this movie and styles of humor that I've criticized in the past.
Mm-hmm.
We talk about Adam McKay directing it. McKay and Will Ferrell have the writing credits,
Mm-hmm.
and Judd Apatow has a producer credit. And
That's a lot of comedy heavyweights on one project.
yeah, and I have bashed Apatow so many times. I'm probably going to watch his new movie sometime today. We'll see how that goes. 2 hours and 15 minutes.
That's the King of Staten Island?
Yes.
I thought that was a TV show until like 2 days ago.
Nope, it's Judd Apatow's brand new movie.
Mm.
And what I have criticized about Apatow is the way he just lets improv run the show.
Mm-hmm.
Which is how his movies get so long, and oftentimes it's just meandering and pointless. But I feel like when you look at scenes in this movie, like the dinner scene,
Mm-hmm.
if that's in, because we see during the outtakes, they keep doing different lines.
Mm-hmm.
And I can never quite tell. Usually in Apatow or McKay movies, I don't know if McKay does it, but Apatow definitely does it. It'll be him shouting the lines off camera at the actors, and they just say them
Mm-hmm.
one after the other. I don't know if McKay does that or if they were just coming up with that with each take.
Mm-hmm.
But either way, it has that sense of improv. And I feel like in like if this were poorly done, I would criticize this dinner scene for going on and on and on and on.
Mm-hmm.
But every new thing they say is funnier than the last, and that's why it works.
I think we peak at the Leonard Skinner concert, don't we?
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. With you talking about Riley being a standout,
Mm-hmm.
it's funny when Will Ferrell and Leslie Bibb are having their back and forth, and then he's saying, "I can imagine Baby Jesus however I want to imagine him." The scene takes off when Cal starts saying how he imagines.
Yeah.
And then it's like he says the tuxedo T-shirt, and that could have been the final line. That could have been the final moment of the scene, and the scene would have been hilarious. But the Leonard Skinner concert comes next after he's hit the peak of the tuxedo T-shirt. The detail I always forget is the Angel Band.
Yeah.
It's like just imagining, like whether McKay threw it at him beforehand or whether it's just him. Just the thought of that whole scene, that whole sequence of the Leonard Skinner concert just rolling off Riley's tongue in the moment.
Yeah.
Regardless, is a great scenario.
He has a lot of fun moments, like when they do the phone call and he's got the TV and the stereo on at the same time. And Ricky actually asks him why, and his response is just, I like to party.
Yeah. Another thing, actually, I'm still on the dinner scene.
Okay.
Oh, number one, it's hilarious in its own right, because this takes us in a whole other direction. Something I talk about when I talk about Happy Gilmore
Mm-hmm.
was a complaint that a lot of people have in a lot of movies, especially really big blockbusters, is product placement.
Mm-hmm.
But I love the way sports comedies like this or Happy Gilmore use them either for comedy or to further the plot.
Mm-hmm.
And I love the idea of him having to insert a Powerade ad into his prayer. And the thing that gets me about this dinner scene before we go on is, and I want your opinion on this because this can go two ways.
Hmm.
Chips placement.
Okay.
This dinner scene. Because there are two different ways a scene like this can go, and usually I go for the way that wouldn't involve Chip or a Chip-like character.
Uh-huh.
If Chip wasn't there to be the single voice of reason, this dinner scene would be psychotic. The people at this dinner table are insane people. And you balance that with a character like Chip there to say, what is going on here?
And I love, like, the first shot we get of Chip. Like, all the people at the table are so animated and talking, and you cut to Chip, and he's just sulking.
Yeah, so my question, I guess you've answered it, but my question to you is, would the scene work better with a Chip to say what is going on here, or would it work better without somebody there to acknowledge that this dinner is insanity?
I think in this case, it's funny to have somebody there to react to it.
Especially when they all start attacking.
Yeah, that's where it comes in. Like, it probably wouldn't be as funny if it was like Chip just saying, what's going on here? And then it just like cuts to a new scene. But the fact that they gang up on him.
And the whole scene starts with, what did you do today? I threw Chip's medals off a bridge, his war medals. And he's just resigned to it at that point.
We're kind of building up to them ganging up on him.
Yeah. Because I think overall, like, usually I would go against having another character there to acknowledge this scene is off.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I'm with you. I think the Chip balance fair enough, especially since they kind of start off with it and ease into.
And Chip kind of gets his own payoff too later, because when Cal joins the family and Ricky comes home and they're all playing Jenga, like, none of the variables have changed. Only Ricky's gone, but Chip is so happy about that. He gives him like that little phrase, and Cal, in true Cal fashion, just responds with, "Kind of creepy, isn't it?"
Yeah, because I think my problem usually with stuff like that is it draws too much attention to the jokes.
Mm-hmm.
But what they do with Chip is able to build on the jokes, which is what usually they fail to do when they do stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I'm with you there.
Yeah. There's so many. I think what makes Talladega Nights work too is just how, and it's funny to say this in a Will Ferrell comedy, how well defined the characters are and their boundaries are recognized and honored.
Yeah, because another thing I love about Riley is something we were kind of talking about with Candy in the last video.
Mm-hmm.
Is the moment when we first realize that, and I don't think we realize just how much in the moment the first time you're seeing it, talking about the character work,
Mm-hmm.
how crucial of a part this is going to play. The fact that Cal wants to win,
Yeah.
and Ricky just shuts him down and is like, "Well, no, because then I wouldn't win. That's that's just wrong." And then they laugh about it, and Cal even says, like, "Yeah, you're right. It's painful, but you're right."
And it's like at the hospital, like whenever Michael Clark Duncan tells him he has to take it slow, and Cal's like, maybe while you're in the hospital, I could win a couple. And Ricky's like, yeah, that's not going to happen. And Cal just responds with, yeah, that's what I was thinking. Like, he's so quick to resign.
It's like it's part a comedic moment and part good for his character, the way the end plays out.
Yeah.
It's like both a punchline and a payoff for him as a character.
But what's funny too is during the whole thing where Cal gets with Ricky's wife, like, he's not being malicious about it, but he does get to have some one-ups, like his Magic Man nickname.
My wrestling history is off.
Mm-hmm.
Who did this first?
I'm not sure.
I
It might have been Cal Naughton. Because I don't think the You Can't See Me stuff came along until 2006 or 2007.
Yeah, because this is like right then, isn't it? 2006.
Yeah.
2005 or 2006.
I think it's 2005 because Anchorman was 2004.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure this is 2006, but we'll look into it. um, and we talked about how some scenes and comedies tend to go on and on.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's some cases where, because the DVD I have is the unrated one.
Does it have the year on it? So we could solve that right now?
2006.
Ah.
Yeah, that's convenient.
Mm-hmm.
So I can never quite remember which scenes are strictly in this and which ones are in the theatrical version, because the only scene I know of for sure is the scene where he's on the bus and the guy says fuck like 5 times. It's obviously new.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm never quite sure, so I never know. Talking about how long some of the gags go on, I can never remember if that they were like that in the theatrical version, because like there's the whole crepe debate.
Mm-hmm.
Like when like when John Gerard has him pinned down, and that scene goes on for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Or there's the this scene is shorter than I remember it being, but I do love the escalation of the knife scene.
Mm-hmm.
By the time it gets to we'll use this knife to pry it out. But I do wonder if do you think the movie at all suffers from overlength?
I don't know. Because, I
Because
mean, everything in the end is pretty well paid off.
yeah, because there are moments where we get to a new scene and there's a new conflict or a new direction it goes or whatever. And I feel like it's adding too much. But then once the scene plays out, I think maybe not. Like by the time he starts driving again,
Mm-hmm.
it feels like we're getting closer to like him learning to drive again and being happy about it, getting his license. I love that that's his driver's license picture. That feels like it should cut right to the climatic race.
Mm-hmm.
But we have the Applebee's scene where he and Reese go their separate ways,
Mm-hmm.
and then we have the scene where he goes to Jean Girard's house.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I question if there's stuff that could be cut out. But I also can never remember, because is the scene at Jean Girard's house, that was in the theatrical cut, wasn't it?
Yes.
Right. But I'm still wondering if it was lengthened or not. I really can't remember. 2006 was 14 years ago. That's why I can't remember.
Yeah.
Because this is the only version I've seen since the theater.
But I'm gonna give the Applebee's scene a pass, because it does have a funny payoff where he's kicked out the exact same way that he was kicked out of the school in the beginning of the movie.
Yeah. And
I appreciate that the movie only used that joke twice.
Yeah.
Because that's easily a joke that they could have tried to use 3 or 4 times, and I appreciate that they only went for it twice. Because it made its point the second time, and then it was gone.
It's like we were talking about with Norm getting thrown in the dumpster in Dirty Work.
Yeah, exactly.
And then right after that, he dismantles the whole "if you ain't first, you're last."
Yeah, he just tears down Ricky Bobby's entire life motto.
There is another question I had about the overlink, but like I said, if the joke works, then it's easily forgiven. There's a whole, by the time we get to the climatic race, when everything should be centered around the race, and that's where we are, and then it just goes. Mm-hmm. They add a brand new joke, and it's one of my favorite jokes. We should be long past introducing new jokes. But this joke they introduce in the last moments of the movie is one of my favorite jokes in the movie.
I wonder if it's the same one I'm thinking of.
The Ed Lauder scenes.
Oh, forgot about the Ed Lauder scenes.
It's only done twice, where they say, "Let's go into the crowd," and Ed Lauder's supposed to be interviewing Kenny Rogers.
Uh-huh.
And the guy that looks nothing like Kenny Rogers. And they're like, "Back to you." And then it's like, "All right, let's go out for an interview with Larry Bird." And it is totally not Larry Bird. Not even close.
I
And it's
guess
like
the one. I guess
there
the
is
one.
no reason.
Go ahead.
There is no reason for those jokes to be there by that point in the movie. They serve no purpose whatsoever. But they're one of my favorite jokes in the whole movie.
The one I was thinking of, I guess, would have gone more along with the product placement. I was thinking of when the crash happens, and the crash happens so long that they throw an Applebee's commercial in the middle of it.
Yeah. And then there is
we were talking about all the comedic people in it. I don't think we've even mentioned yet that Jean Girard's husband's Andy Richter.
Yeah. And there's all kinds of people that pop in. Molly Shannon does some fun stuff here. Mm-hmm. We keep mentioning Reese. Gary Cole is obviously great in this.
Yeah.
I still use the "shut up, I'll put you in the microwave" line. Oh, while we're here, also there's also a comedic scene I really really love. When you talk about the way scenes escalate unexpectedly. Mm-hmm. And the trouble with this is I think it was blown in the trailers, if I remember correctly. But there's a comedic moment, and I feel like I'm talking about the bat and the great outdoors again. Mm. There is a comedic scene in this movie that is so perfectly filmed and executed. It is flawless when you talk about a scene escalating. But this has a moment of pure escalation with the camera barely moving.
Okay.
It's Ricky driving blindfolded. You have one shot of the full street, and he's like, all right, now drive. And it looks like the joke, if you haven't had it spoiled for you by the trailers, is just going to be Ricky scraping against the cars as he goes down the street. Mm-hmm. Now, it looks like that's all the joke is going to be. And then it just literally takes a total left turn, and he drives through a yard and through a house without the camera even moving. There is, with no cuts, they set up that a joke is going to be one thing, and then it goes way off into another thing. That is such a perfect comedic scene.
And what's funny, too, is it was when you, like, it's one of those jokes that when you think about it, it gets kind of funnier. Because in your mind, you're like, that road was perfectly straight. Why the hell did Ricky make a hellish left turn there?
And we were talking about how it doesn't go into sentimentality. Mm-hmm. Anytime there's a new conflict, it's usually backed up by comedy. Mm-hmm. There's still a couple of points we have to make about the relationship between Ricky and Cal, and how this whole conflict of Cal moving into his house and taking his wife and living his life.
Mm-hmm. And Cal not thinking anything of it.
Yeah, it's the running joke of he keeps getting sucked back into it. Mm-hmm. They make a full plan before Ricky's like, wait a minute, no. And I love it's so casual. There's so many lines in here that work because they're so casually delivered that you don't even think about how funny they are until like after the fact. Mm-hmm. It's like when Ricky says, dude, you stole my wife. You're living in my house. You're banging my wife. And Cal's response is, come on, dude, that was like last week.
There's also the way that scene ends that you were talking about where they make the big plan. And Ricky's like, no, I hate you. And Cal's just like, I'll talk to you tomorrow. And Ricky just responds with, yeah, I'll talk to you tomorrow.
There's actually a moment that happens beforehand when it's the first time he realizes that Cal's living in his house. Mm-hmm. And it's when he's like leaving the house with his head down. And just Cal calls from the front door, I'll call you tomorrow, buddy. Shut up. Like I love when comedies can actually not get wrapped up in their conflicts like that and stay comedies. I hate how rare it feels. Because there's so many comedies get wrapped up in like all of that, and they have those moments where it's just like a downer. It's like if this were a worse comedy, there would have been no comedy there. It would have been Ricky just sulking after Cal moved into his house.
Yeah.
But we get these amazing scenes between the two of them on the phone.
Yeah.
And it just keeps building. The conflict ends up making the movie funnier. How often do you see that?
Yeah, because not only do you have the phone conversations, but then we get to bring Gary Cole back.
Yeah, you have to go back. You have to go back to comedies in like the 40s to find writing that uses conflict for comedy rather than a lazy filler in your script.
Mm-hmm.
So that and of all the movies to be talking about how big of a deal this is. I mean, because it's
Well, I mean,
not,
I guess that does make it aptly named. It is a ballad.
yeah. I mean, because obviously it's not totally foreign to Will Ferrell because you can say the same thing about Anchorman as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm in a glass case of emotion. All of that is the downer point. Baxter getting punted off the bridge. I mean, it's more so it's not as rare as it probably sounds the way I'm saying now, but it's something that I get worked up about because comedies always fall into those same traps, and it's always so refreshing to see a comedy that is just straight through funny.
Mm-hmm.
And this is definitely one of those. Like I said, even BASEketball kind of falls into those traps a little bit, just a tiny, tiny bit. So, do you have anything to add to Talladega Nights?
No, I'm making sure. See, there's so many funny people that you have to think through each character and think if they have moments or not that you need to touch on because they did such a good job giving every character a chance to shine.
You know what's hilarious?
Hmm.
Is Amy Adams was already one Oscar nomination in when this came out
Mm-hmm.
because it was the year after Junebug.
Mm-hmm.
But the way she monologues to him about how he is a driver right before they just bang in the bar in front of everybody
Yeah.
kind of feels like a precursor to some of the Oscar-y scenes we've seen her do. Like the way she delivers her lines in Doubt is not that dissimilar to the way she delivers that monologue.
I think one of my favorite things about Amy Adams in this movie is the way she's introduced. Ricky Bobby is just autographing everything under the sun, and she walks up to him, and he just starts to sign her forehead. And she has to remind him who she is.
And it's literally just sloppy dog.
Yeah.
And then it's before that bar scene. I think the only other time we see her after that is we get one shot of her cheering during a race. I think that's it.
We get her reaction to the wreck. Because the reactions are kind of funny because she's in shock, Leslie Bibb's in shock, and the kids just go, cool. Even the kids, like, when they try to make kids be funny, sometimes it can fail. But the kids that they got, I got to give them credit. The way they deliver some of these lines is great.
Yeah, because they're just the right amount of they are as obnoxious as they have to be.
Mm-hmm.
Because there are so many characters in other comedies, especially kids, where the joke is that they're obnoxious.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like they're able to make their obnoxiousness funny with those lines, but at the same time, even though we think it's funny, it's also extremely satisfying when Jane Lynch finally slaps them.
Yeah. We didn't even mention that. The second most serious character in the movie after Amy Adams is Jane Lynch, of all people.
It's so jarring seeing her with long hair.
And I think that's just another case of where, everybody plays they're all committed.
Speaking of Jane Lynch, I've got to make a Wreck-It Ralph connection here.
Hmm.
And I'm not talking about John C. Reilly.
Okay.
Another person I just love in general that's got a little bit part in this movie is Jack McBrayer.
I wondered if that's where you were going.
David Koechner's on the crew as well.
Yeah. Which is surprising that he didn't have a bigger role after Anchorman.
Yeah. We didn't even mention that. I do love that whole bit of they try to motivate him by telling him Jack McBrayer's dead.
Yeah.
And it's like, whether that's one of those cases where it works either way. The fact that he gets caught by poking his head in eagerly
Mm-hmm.
is a funny way to end that. But if he didn't find out till the end that Jack McBrayer was still alive, it would have been just as funny.
I think for Jack McBrayer, it works because of the way that he peeks in and just like he sells that moment so well. I think if you had anybody other than Jack McBrayer, it wouldn't have worked.
He plays it perfectly that he would be that eager that he can't hold down the facade enough. He needs to know now. How did he react? Was he sad? So would you say that's Talladega Nights in a nutshell? Did we miss anything?
No, I don't think we could have. I think we went on about Talladega Nights for a while. There's a lot to talk about though, because like I said, this was Will Ferrell in his prime.
Yeah.
Like everybody loved Talladega Nights.
That's how I remember it. There's some people where he's like me, he's soured on them because it's like the same old thing and it's just stale.
Mm-hmm.
But I've always been able to come back to this one and it's still just as strong.
I think it helps too that the other characters are so funny. Like a lot of his movies anymore feel like the Will Ferrell show. When in this one, he's not going to be able to put himself head and shoulders above John C. Reilly, Sacha Baron Cohen, all these people around him. I think Ricky Bobby's character is funny, but I think this movie is made by the people around him.
I think there's one more thing I forgot to mention. I wanted to be sure to mention. It's another joke where it's a couple of things we touched on. It's the whole thing of try not to draw too much attention to what the joke is.
Mm-hmm.
And bringing a joke back. It's the whole, he thinks he's on fire, so he strips down to his underwear thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny the first time, especially when he's doing the Help Me Tom Cruise thing.
Mm-hmm.
But they draw attention to the joke by having one of the announcers say, how did he get down to his underwear so quickly?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, well, yeah, that's the joke. So not only do they not do that, but it's funny. I always thought it was significantly funnier when that joke comes back. Because he cuts back out of the car, he's in his full suit, there's one cut, and suddenly he's back in his underwear.
And I also love the way that we reused this joke and the fact that they didn't try to come up with more lines for him to say when he was screaming. We don't hear it.
Literally, plot is happening while it's happening.
Yeah. We're setting up Cal's heel turn. Which is driven by Carly, which makes it funny because Cal was manipulated into his whole heel turn.
And I love the fact, talking about the way Cal handles it, like still calling him, wanting to hang out, trying to be his buddy, that it's still called a heel turn. And that's another thing too, talking about Cal's heel turn, is that's one of those cases there's a joke here that is so out of left field. It's something that you would expect in a more basketball like spoof movie, and that's the Get Out. When there's one very small joke devoted to the fact that Ricky Bobby's house is haunted. It's never mentioned before this scene and never mentioned again, and that's the beauty of it.
I think it's built up to, I think on the phone conversation, doesn't Cal ask him if it's haunted?
Yeah, he says, I think your house is haunted. And then it doesn't get brought up again until he hangs up and we just hear.
And of course, John C. Reilly's reaction to it.
See, this is Talladega Nights in a nutshell and why it works. We're trying to move on to basketball, but we keep coming back to Talladega Nights. We can't get away from it because there's always a joke there. But before we go on for 2 hours, should we try to transition to basketball? I guess I should ask myself because I'm the one that keeps bringing Talladega Nights back.
Yeah.
All right. let's go on to baseball, which came out in 19.
I feel like whenever we're going back again for a second. I feel like every time you try to move on to basketball, Jack McBrayer is peeking out from behind, like saying, like, "You want to talk more about Talladega Nights?"
So, I want to say baseball came out in 1998, I think.
Yeah, that sounds right.
All right. And this, so I would have been about 7 or 8. And I really wanted to see this movie because it was an R-rated movie. And I don't think I had seen one at that point, at least all the way through.
Mm.
And it looked like a comedy, like a silly comedy or whatever.
Had you not seen Kingpin by this point?
Possibly, though Kingpin is only PG-13.
Oh, that's right. There's an R-rated cut out there. Okay.
Yeah. And I watched it, and I remember liking it, particularly for its over-the-top nature, of course. But needless to say, this is a movie that I have, and I could say that. So you want to talk about the Farrelly brothers? Me, Myself, and Irene falls into this category as well.
Mm-hmm.
This is a movie where I saw it when I was really young, because I was like 9 when Me, Myself, and Irene came out, and probably 7 or 8 when this came out.
Mm-hmm.
And I just watched it, and I recognized the silliness and the slapstick and the stuff like that. And it was like, hey, that's a funny movie. And there's some dirty stuff in there. They talk about sex jokes or whatever. But with both these movies, this and Me, Myself, and Irene, if I were to watch them every year, which I probably did, with every year, I get more and more of the jokes.
Mm-hmm.
And like I've been watching Me, Myself, and Irene since I was like 9 or 10. And when I watched Me, Myself, and Irene again just a few years ago, the first thing I thought was, this movie is dirty as fuck. Like, how are we ever allowed to watch this? We didn't get any of it. But now that I do, good Lord, Me, Myself, and Irene is fucking filthy. And I love it for that. And the same thing with basketball. Like, there's some stuff where basketball was part of, like, me learning my vocabulary. Listen to this, okay? There is a great joke throughout basketball, and that is how nonchalant the announcers are. In any of them, in any of the announcers we see, anybody featured on ESPN is so casual. And the news as well. When they talk about Ted Denslow's death, and he says, I guess time finally ran out for the old cocksucker. I believe that was my first time hearing that word, and I had no idea what he was saying. Mm-hmm. And now every time I hear that word, even today in adulthood, the first thing I see is Ernest Borgnine's face as he's joking.
I think this is another one of those movies where it's like Talladega Nights. Like, Trey Parker's your centerpiece, and he's funny, but everyone around him is funny as well. Except for Yasmin Bleeth doesn't really have many. She's kind of keeping the story on kind of a straight path.
Yasmin Bleeth has one great line. As we talked about with the gay jokes in Talladega Nights, and we'll talk about a lot in basketball, we're treading that PC line. And I love this towards the beginning when he first meets her, and you can tell they're taking a dig at PC. Mm-hmm. When he says, oh, you're those guys that, grant wishes to sick and dying kids. And she says, we prefer to refer to them as health challenged or survival impaired.
That's true.
Because she says it so straight. But yeah, obviously the star supporting player would be Squeak, right? Because Reamer would be a co-lead.
Yeah. This is another one of those movies that you and I have brought up before that has spawned several in-jokes.
And I'm always so happy because baseball seems like one of those movies that didn't really take off in popularity. Mm-hmm. Like, it's not a big thing in pop culture. but I hear plenty of lines and references to it.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever I do, I feel like I'm in part of like a club where it's like, oh, I know what you mean by that line. I know exactly where that comes from.
You pull out your Steve Rogers. I understood that reference.
There was one, I was on a forum and talking about the Gifts we use, like the Michael Clark Duncan one.
Mm-hmm.
And the reviews for the first It from 2017 had just come out. And a guy posted them in a forum and said, I cannot tell you how pumped I am that the reviews are so good for this.
Mm-hmm.
And I posted the gif of it. You're excited, feel these nipples.
Which is delivered by Al Michaels, of all people. Al Michaels gets a lot of moments in this movie, which is funny because he's a sportscaster. Like, he's not even a comedic actor, but he does so well in this movie.
And who's the other one?
Oh, man, I can't remember. I just remember Al Michaels because it's Bob Costas. That's who it is. It's just like the scene where when they're watching the cheerleaders, and Al Michaels is like, just a few years ago, these girls were only in grade school. And then he just has this look as he watches them.
Yeah, because most of the, like, people in sports like them play themselves, don't they?
Yeah, Talladega Nights was the same way.
Yeah. And I think that's where that's a lot of the comedy comes from. What about the guy that interviews them in the locker room? Is he an actual person or is he a character?
I'm not sure.
I hope he's a real person.
He has a great line too.
That's what I want to talk about is he has one particular great line, but that whole locker room scene is just full of gold.
Yeah. I mean, let's just start with the fact that whenever you turn the scene on, they have hats and T-shirts celebrating that they lost.
Because what is it? There is it starts. I love that once that's revealed. Then because last time we rewatched this together, we talked about the fact that the great thing about this movie and sticking with that sort of Zucker style is, apart from those couple of sentimental moments, the movie is relentless with jokes.
Yeah.
Like, it almost makes up for those sentimental moments with no comedy because there's so many comedic scenes in this movie that have comedy in the foreground and the background at the same time.
Yeah, it's a double layer.
Like, almost throughout the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's insane. And so you have, like, this whole thing where you're talking about the clothes that just say losers.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the great moment where he's talking about, like, Jansen didn't psych me out. What's he talking about? And Reamer says, yeah, if anyone should get the psych out, it should be Denzel. That's just so unexpectedly dark. And he just walks away. And then that goes right into Coop being interviewed.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what I love more, the payoff of it seems to be raining shit on Joe Cooper right now, or the fact that he walked away from Coop to say that as Coop was saying, I really shouldn't be alone. I need somebody to talk to. And he gets cut off.
And then we have one last little joke before we cut away where Squeak comes up and he's just, hey, do you want to do an interview with me? And the sportscaster, no.
I don't know what context it is, but I can assure whoever is watching this video, you have said, hey, want to do an interview with me? In just random conversation to remind me of how funny that moment is. I think it's whenever somebody says no to something, you'll just say, hey, that sounds like, hey, you want to do an interview with me? Yeah, we say what we do about Talladega Nights, but BASEketball is ingrained in our vocabulary forever.
Let's talk about Squeak for a minute. Now, in comedies, there is the abused side character. It does happen. And it can go either way. But with Squeak, I don't know why it works, but it does. Because, I mean, Squeak endures a lot of abuse in this movie from his very first scene moving forward.
His first scene, his first couple of scenes raise a couple of questions. And I love that sometimes he has so much bad luck, some of it happens off screen. Like, well, I know a question you raised back in the day that I wouldn't have thought about was, it's because it's only referenced once very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Is it a reference to Trey Parker and Matt Stone that something bad is always happening to Squeak, and he corrects them once by saying his real name is Kenny?
Yeah.
That can't be an accident. And then I've got a question.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think me and you have ever asked, even when we last rewatched it, I don't think we ever asked this question. I think because we're so familiar with the dialogue, there's still jokes that are passing us by.
Mm-hmm.
So when they're showing Squeak his room and his dog bed, he says, "I can't believe those assholes fired you for not shutting off our gas for 6 weeks." And Squeak says, "It was losing the truck that pissed him off the most." What happened to the truck?
And we never go further.
Because as far as I remember, we don't know what happened to the truck. And I like to think that's not even a deleted scene. I like to think the joke is that we don't know what happened to the truck.
And how it relates to that scenario at all.
And then there is the running joke that anything related to Squeak is the worst thing in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Like saying that your mom's going out with Squeak is enough to psych people out.
Mm-hmm.
And it takes a minute for him to register that that's an insult.
Mm-hmm.
And then probably my personal favorite is, "Squeak has a better shot with Jenna than you do. That's low, you son of a bitch." That line is delivered so straight. And Squeak's standing right in front of him when he says it that way.
He even asks, he's like, "Why is that low?"
and he's like totally ignored.
And let's not forget, during this whole scene, Reamer is dressed as a doctor. The over-the-top way with the head on it, the thing on his head and everything.
And wearing the stethoscope that actually comes into play. But then there was, what else was I going to mention here? Shit, I lost it. Oh, it was talking about Squeak being ignored.
Mm-hmm.
Either being insulted or ignored or both at the same time. Where they're all angry that Coop turned down Kane's offer.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, even Squeak is pissed off. "I never really minded anyway, shut up." And I love that it's either one or the other or both. Either he's ignored or he's the butt of insults or whatever. Abuse, whatever.
It's like when Reamer and Coop get in a fight in the locker room, and Reamer storms off and he wants to take Squeak with him. He pulls out a drawer in the locker room that Squeak is sleeping in. And his response is just, "Wake up, bitch, you're my new best friend."
And he looks so far into that slumber so shortly after a game apparently took place.
Well, not only that, but it's obviously the middle of the night, and Squeak's first question is, "Are we going to the zoo?"
And once again, that's a joke that's no attention is drawn to it.
Mm-hmm.
He just does it, and that's like that kind of Zucker humor that we love, and that's why these spoof movies work so well. Is the jokes can happen without attention being drawn to them. There's no straight character.
Mm-hmm. Even the villain, Robert Vaughn, he's got a lot of fun stuff to do, and a lot of it's reactions, but he sells the reactions so well, especially when it comes to Reamer.
Oh my god, the Kane and Reamer scenes. Oh my god, that is some of the funniest shit ever. It's always, no matter how many times we quote those scenes to each other, which is a lot,
Mm-hmm.
and any time we rewatch it, those scenes are always just as funny as they were before. you are always whipping out the "you want us to play for Dallas" line. And it always, in any context, it makes us crack up. In any context.
I just love how, like, Reamer, and he does it twice. He pushes Robert Vaughn to the point where Robert Vaughn's only resolution is just he just walks away because he just can't handle the stupid anymore.
I love that the final nail in the coffin the first time around is, and he'd have to quit basketball too. because he starts off dumb, and Kane is trying to get him on the right path, and the next thing that Reamer says is dumber than the last thing. He goes down his own rabbit hole of stupid and doesn't come out. He gets farther in it. because Kane tells him that's the wrong thing. That's not what I'm talking about. And Reamer keeps going on that.
And I think what helps
his
too,
own conversation by the end of this thing.
I think what helps too is Reamer is being over the top and how stupid he is. And Robert Vaughn is responding to all this as a normal person would.
He plays
like he's not getting over the top angry. He's dumbfounded that Reamer's that stupid. Because usually he just, before he says anything, he responds with, "What? No."
And he's getting slightly more over the top in the locker room because he's starting to make noise and he's starting to snap at them. But it's like, because that first scene with Reamer already happened, it makes sense that he's snapping now.
Yeah.
And while we're on
Let's
topic
not forget in that last locker room scene when he snaps, one of the things that leads up to it is Coop spins around, and for some reason Robert Vaughn about gets whacked with a dick.
Yeah, I never quite got the point of the giant dick joke, but but the thing also talking about Robert Vaughn is about how he is able to play it so straight, and that's what makes the scene even funnier.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the way Matt Stone is playing it is absolutely perfect, but the reason it is as funny as it is in total is Robert Vaughn just being a stone wall against it.
Mm-hmm.
And that brings into the fact that, yes, there are 3 Oscar-nominated actors in this movie, one of which is a winner. And all 3 of those nominations took place in the 1950s. They really reached to get the veterans in this movie.
You were talking about how, before we leave Robert Vaughn, you were talking about how he plays the movie mostly straight, but he has his own over-the-top moments. Like, one of his first scenes, he's like, I couldn't help but overhear your problem. And he pulls out this giant listening device and just sets it inside the stands. And he doesn't make any mention of it. He doesn't even look at it when he moves it.
And it's such a great joke because it just can pass right by you and you don't even...
It's a blink and you miss it joke because there's not even a reaction to it from Reamer and Coop.
Yeah, and it's such a... Because that's the thing, too, is we keep talking about the Airplane style of comedy being big and over the top.
Mm-hmm.
There's plenty of jokes like that in Airplane also, and it's really nice to see them here also.
Yeah.
Where it's just one small thing. And speaking of the cast of Airplane, of course, Ernest Borgnine won an Oscar for Marty. And it's interesting to see him do the will reading scene. And then, of course, Robert Vaughn was nominated for The Young Philadelphians, which is like a courtroom drama.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen how well he can play off this, because Robert Vaughn is mostly known for his TV work, but he's also an Oscar-nominated actor.
Mm-hmm.
You know who our 3rd Oscar-nominated actor is, right?
No.
Robert Stack. Bringing over the perfect sort of thing with... because the whole thing about Airplane was the characters like him and Lloyd Bridges and Leslie Nielsen were playing it like they were in a serious movie with some over-the-top aspects like sniffing glue and stuff like that. Robert Stack getting all that stuff. But they're combining now that style of humor they were able to get out of him versus what he was doing with Unsolved Mysteries. And to take what he was actually doing with Unsolved Mysteries and inject that humor into it.
Mm-hmm.
was a stroke of genius.
I think one of my favorite things is when they're looking into the disappearance of Joe Cooper, which would be very easy to find. Just look where he bought a plane ticket. But anyway, and that there's a nice payoff to that at the end. But Robert Stack he's telling the story of what's going on, and he drops a neighbor's name, and he follows it with a neighbor that asks not to be identified.
That's another one of those lines that just slips right by.
Yeah. And it's also the way that he delivers it so straight is he follows that up by mentioning somebody else's name, and he describes them as the nosy bitch that lives down the street. But he says it so straight and says it like he would say it if he was on Unsolved Mysteries.
Yeah, and same
like
thing
there's
for
no over-the-topness brought to it.
Same thing for he's hanging by his neck in his fucking closet.
Yeah. I mean, just to see Robert Stack in Unsolved Mysteries mode say he's hanging by his neck in his fucking closet is a treat. It's an absolute treat.
That whole Unsolved Mysteries thing, I want to know whose idea that was specifically, because they deserve a medal.
And there's even a fun payoff at the end, and Robert Stack still keeps the same delivery. They're showing the video of Coop celebrating, and he just says, "Update. We still have no fucking clue where this guy is."
Oh.
The way that, like, you could, the whole Unsolved Mysteries thing just sounds, it kind of feels almost like a comedy sketch stuck into a movie.
Yeah.
So many jokes that come out of it. There's the age progression joke where apparently him being gone a couple days is enough to have an age progression photograph.
Let alone what the payoff is.
Yeah. And it's like, you think, when you look at it, you're like, oh, they're just going to show another picture of him because nothing's changed. And that's not what happens at all.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's a small joke that doesn't even need words, but it escalates so out of left field.
It's like when they, I think what gets lost a lot too is we get a reenactment of the hanging by his neck in his fucking closet. And when we see the guy reenact it, it makes it look like such a sorry scene. Like, I think he's smoking a cigar. He's got gray hair and a beard.
Oh, yeah. And yes, remember, he's supposed to be hanging by his neck in his fucking closet. He's actively smoking.
And let's not forget, that was all kicked off by just Reamer weighing in angrily.
And then, of course, there's the jab at Disney World.
Yeah.
Which has a comedic break because he pauses to let that joke register before it goes into the age progression joke. But even with the break, he's still saying it totally straight.
Now, you were talking about how this movie has sentimental moments that don't always let the comedy cut it off. I think my favorite instance of the sentimental moment where the comedy does cut it off is Coop's meeting with Reggie Jackson.
Okay, I've got something to say about this.
Okay.
Tell me what you were going to say, and then I will possibly respond.
It's how he's starting to tell the story, and we know the story's turning because he just says some wretched little shit got the third one. And then Coop starts getting more and more anxious. And then finally Reggie turns around to say something nice, and Coop just responds, "I have your fucking ball."
That's it. That scene may be even funnier than you realize. Something about this scene I never knew. A slight difference.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it might be funnier than we think it is now.
Okay.
Are you ready for this?
Yeah.
So, I'm watching the movie again, and I have all my fans on because it's so hot.
Mm-hmm.
So because I have all my fans on, I turn the captions on.
Mm-hmm.
That line is not what we've always thought it was.
Okay.
And if once you see it written out and you know that's what it is, you can vaguely hear it when he says it.
Okay.
When he turns around and screams,
Mm-hmm.
and I did not know this until the last time I watched it because I just happened to have the captions on. He says, "I don't have your fucking ball."
Oh.
He's denying it, and I think that might be funnier.
He
What do
says
you
it so
think?
fast, I always thought he was like admitting to having it.
Yeah, that's what I was. I thought he was confessing,
Mm-hmm.
but he's denying it vehemently.
Was it one of those cases where when you saw that you were like, wait a minute, and you had to turn on your fans and or turn off your fans and go investigate?
Yeah, I thought it was like maybe a typo or something, or maybe they misheard it, but I rewound it. He says, "I don't."
Huh.
You can barely hear it, but he says, "I don't have your fucking ball." So to see that look in his eyes, and to see how paranoid he is, and he's hoping he's getting away with something, I think it's funnier now.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think? Or are you gonna have to rewatch that scene now?
I'm gonna have to go look for it.
Surely it's on YouTube by itself.
Mm.
So yeah, that's what I learned about that scene recently.
You were talking about a lot of background jokes, like another one I think of. We do get a cut of it, but it's still kind of happening in the background. Is when Ernest Borgnine is first talking to Coop about creating the sport, and there's guys celebrating on the roof, and they start to fall off the roof, and Coop is reacting, and Denslow doesn't even pick up on it.
Isn't there somebody in the background screaming, "Call 911"? That's another simple joke too. I'll always laugh at Reamer just staring at the bird, which I want to say he's still doing when all the carnage starts happening.
I believe so. I think he's in the background doing it. Yeah, and it's funny how many different styles of comedy are in this movie. Like, for example, the Psych Outs. The Psych Outs could have been all gross out gags, and a lot of them are, but there's also a lot that aren't.
I love the stuff that's entirely unexplained,
Mm-hmm.
like Coop's scary face,
Mm-hmm.
and the fact he does he gets the Beetlejuice shot, and then Reamer's response is just, "Oh my god," and then never talked about again. I love that we're still shitting on Squeak, where we get the joke where his rubber masks don't work and then his regular face does. What do you think about there's something to is there have you noticed how flexible the rules are about the cycle?
Yeah.
Because there's the whole thing about not crossing the line, a certain line, but Coop does that with the mime thing. Reamer does it with the horse whisperer audiobook. Which, by the way, is one of my favorite.
I think one of my favorite Psych Outs is disgustingly simple. It's so simple that it doesn't even. It happens at the very first instance of the game where they make it up in the driveway against those two guys, and it's Reamer just runs over by the guy and gets his picture taken with him, and that's enough.
I don't know, and that's the thing is I don't know what's funnier, Reamer's pose or that Coop has a camera. It's amazing how many things just materialize for the Psych Out. Like, when did Reamer go get watermelon? And then there's like, sometimes they work together on Psych Outs. It's never determined if that's legal or not.
Mm-hmm.
And then I love the idea of him getting, when they're, he gets flagged for doing a gay joke.
Yeah.
Now, like, the Psych Out jokes have a moral ground.
Yeah. And Coop's defense is it wasn't a gay joke, it was an Australian joke.
And then that's the thing also is talking about the un-PC nature is the different teams are very interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. It's stereotype central.
But at the same time, is that the joke in itself?
Yeah.
So it's hard to tell if they're.
And I love how some of the psych outs play into it. Like the Miami team, they're the dealers, so they're like drug dealers. And one of the psych outs is literally Coop just turning his back and he has on a DEA jacket. And that's all he has to do.
The one thing I always didn't like that I would have been interested in was, apart from mostly poor attempts of just them, like maybe this just shows how like evolved the Bears are as a team.
Mm-hmm.
But none of the other teams have elaborate psych outs like that. They only just have words and trash talk.
Yeah.
I kind of would like to have seen more of a psych out showdown. But yeah.
Like the one guy that's like, Coop, your mom's a terrible cook. And he just kind of nods in agreement and makes his shot.
That's Greg Grunberg, isn't it?
It might be.
Or he's there for it. I don't think he's the guy that says it, but he's there.
Mm-hmm.
And then talking about the different styles of humor, I think the last thing I have to bring up here is what was probably our favorite scene.
Mm-hmm.
Well, no, there was that one moment where you and your best friend at the time, I don't know who you call your best friend now, but he was, and you guys were watching baseball in another room
Mm-hmm.
on the video that I had,
Mm-hmm.
and I was in another room. I heard you watching the will reading scene, and it's the scene where he says, "I'll come by. I like hospitals," and Coop says, "No, you don't. You like Taco Bell."
Mm-hmm.
And you and your friend found that scene so funny. I heard you from another room rewind it and play it back again. Just to hear Coop say, "No, you don't. You like Taco Bell." But I feel like the joke that really was a hit among us. I remember Dad was all for this scene also. We watched this scene with Dad over and over again. Was the absolute total and complete chaos that is the hospital scene.
Yeah. I feel like the hospital scene is where it goes completely as far over the top as it goes.
You could probably say 0 to 100.
Yeah.
And I love the joke that it starts off with, where it's like, "Oh no, they think Joey's dead because his bed's empty," and it's like, "Oh no, he's been moved," and they think it's to the morgue. the nurse would word it that way. He's been moved next door. And then you want to talk. We've been talking about escalating jokes this whole video.
Mm-hmm.
This is just escalation. Just the epitome of it.
Mm-hmm.
They even throw in. Can I assume that's a little nice reference to George Clooney, given that George Clooney played a huge part in South Park getting off the ground?
Oh, I thought it was an ER joke.
But it's obviously an ER joke, but I like to think it doubles as a, hey, let's throw a reference to Clooney in here.
Oh.
Yes, it's definitely an ER reference. So, yeah. So
and the fact that they're doing all the like Squeak checks for a pulse in his foot, which Squeak pays for later.
Yeah.
And I mean, you talk about over the top, like when Coop thinks he's cold, and the reason he thinks he's cold is because the cord's been sat on, and the guy's turning blue. So Coop tells this old man, "Can I borrow your blanket?" And the guy goes flying in the air.
I still don't know the physics of that every time I watch that.
The only way I could describe the physics of it is I've had a similar instance happen when I tried to take a blanket from my cat, but it wasn't a human being.
Please tell me you said, "Sir, can I borrow your blanket?"
No, missed opportunity. But she takes the blanket so frequently, I'll have a chance to do that.
That's an underrated aspect of that blanket scene, is how hostile Coop gets when he
Can I borrow your blanket?
because there's hardly any escalation. It goes from "Sir, can I borrow your blanket?" to the aggressive one. Oh God!
And the fact that when the nurse finally catches him, Reamer has like a saw.
Like it's okay. Let's be clear right up front. It's so fucking stupid.
Mm-hmm.
With Coop running through the bedpans and Squeak climbing back out of the chute. Them doing the over-the-top electrocution thing. It's all so dumb, but it's so gloriously dumb.
And I love that it's referenced a couple more times because Yasmin Bleeth shows up at the door and she talks about some madman at the hospital dressed in Beers uniforms.
She calls it a terrorist attack.
Yeah. And then that's met with Reamer and Squeak coming out of another room saying, hey, look at all this cool shit we got at the hospital. Somehow, when they got kicked out, they got to take souvenirs.
They were probably just thrown out as is. Oh my God. But yeah, one more point I want to bring up.
One other thing we forgot to point out is the monitor gets unplugged, so it just beeps, and Reamer's response is just, holy mother of God, he's flatlined.
But I want to mention something because you mentioned Squeak paying the price for what he did. What's interesting about Coop and Reamer as characters and how we grow to go along with them is if we go by the first scene, they are revolting people.
Mm-hmm.
They go to Brittany Kaiser's party, and we've talked before about how much we love the way he sneaks cock in as an insult.
Yeah.
They go to this girl's
we see them, Coop's pissing in the bushes.
And then they say that they want to fuck her in front of her dad. Then they go up to what they think is her bedroom, and they find a vibrator and her panties and start to violate them. And it's like, do we not hate them for that? Because they are instantly punished for it because of what the payoff is.
Let's not forget that little scrummage through that room does lead to a game-winning psych out at the end of the night.
It does win them the game. Because I think Coop thinks he's kidding until he says, "Dude, there's another one."
Yeah. And I love that it psychs the guy out so much that he throws the basketball onto the roof.
Even then, you could tell the dude just flat out gives up. Like, even if they hadn't won the game on that, the dude would have like just walked away.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
And what Coop and Reamer take away from that is, in order to get laid, they need khakis. That was their big takeaway.
Which they never do. They never need to, I guess. All right. Is that basketball in a nutshell?
I mean, there's a lot of other stuff we didn't hit, like Reamer's toolery once he turns heel. Yeah. It gets more over the top as it goes. It's at one point that he has a stunt double, essentially, that runs the bases for him.
There's the moment I talked about before where they pretty much break the fourth wall. The only thing Trey Parker doesn't do is look right into the camera when he says, "Oh, you're such a big shot. Now you're going to act in a Hollywood movie. You fucking sell out." And then he stops to think about it for a long time.
There's one dated joke I can think of, and I guess you couldn't really call it dated, but it doesn't really apply anymore. It's after they take Joey to the bar, and he's having surgery, and the nurse is like, he's 8 years old and he smells like Robert Downey Jr. People today won't get that joke.
Nor the Christian Slayer reference.
No, that's true. So there's a couple jokes that if you don't know your pop culture history, you may not catch on right away.
Oh, there was one more thing I wanted to mention about the psych outs.
Okay.
There's one line that they changed, and I kind of wish they didn't.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know why. And you can see the dubbing, too. The VHS for this had a gag reel after the credits.
Mm-hmm.
And we watched that a few times also. And in that gag reel, you will notice that when Jansen's trying to psych out Reamer,
Mm-hmm.
Reamer had a different line that was dubbed over.
Mm-hmm.
In the movie, it's just nice psych out. But he says, Jansen's attempt at a psych out is, hey, Reamer, you better make sure your toe's not over the line. The line in the gag reel is, hey, Jansen, you better make sure my dick's not up your ass. Why is that not still the line?
I wonder if that line was the last straw where like the MPAA was like, okay, you're getting NC-17 unless you change this line.
Yeah, because it wasn't that Matt Stone couldn't say it. He was saying it. The reason the takes weren't used is he wasn't making the shot.
Yeah.
So it's like, unless they, I don't know why they wouldn't use that line, because it's great.
Yeah, because he had his back turned, so you could literally dub anything over it.
Yeah. But it's like when he kind of turns a little bit, you can tell there's like ADR at work there.
Yeah.
Now, maybe the NBA did have a problem with that, but it's like, after everything else,
there's a lot of cameos in this movie either. We didn't even talk about Jenny McCarthy.
Yeah, and her trailer hitch joke.
Yeah.
And the innuendos being a running joke.
Yeah.
In general. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar returns, another alumnus from Airplane.
Yeah, as an exhibit in Robert Vaughn's museum.
That whole, I know we went through the whole thing, but God, that scene is such pure gold. Oh my God.
There's even like the smallest jokes, like Reamer's walking beside him and then Reamer ends up on an escalator going down.
While in thought, I mean, I struggle to say in thought when talking about Reamer, but as far as in thought as Reamer can be.
Yeah.
Oh. All right. We've been going a little while. Would you say this is our starting? I'd say it's pretty clear. Oh, man. I mean, obviously, Talladega Nights is the better movie, right?
Yeah.
But it's like, and Talladega Nights is funny throughout. But do we laugh harder at BASEketball?
How much nostalgia plays into that though?
Yeah, I don't know, because that's the thing too. Is
nostalgia and in jokes probably have a big thing there.
Yeah, because it is no longer, Matt Stone is no longer the reason I laugh at him saying, "You want us to play for Dallas? You are the reason I laugh at that line every time." So that is hard to say. But overall, I would say Talladega Nights is a better structured movie in the way it's able to use comedy throughout without resorting to sentimentality that doesn't have a joke to back it up. Like I said, even if it's brief and just a couple of moments, Talladega Nights didn't have it.
Nah.
So the closest it gets, I think, is when Reese leaves Applebee's.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, still, he shuts down the "you ain't first, your last" thing. They're walking down the middle of the damn road.
The way he was ejected from Applebee's.
Yeah.
Which is a callback to another joke from earlier.
And then there's even the moment when, like, he and Reese are making amends, and he's like, "I've got my family, and I've got my lady, and everybody loves me." It's punctuated by Amy Adams saying, "Yeah, we had sex."
There's the triumphant scene where he's running from the car. We went back. We took Jack McBrady's advice and went back. There's the scene where he's learning. The triumphant moments are even that way. Like the big triumphant moment where he outruns the cops and he checks under the car and it's Lucky Charms. And there's a letter from Reese and it ends with P.S. Don't try to snort these.
Oh. Okay, so basically Talladega Nights wins out, but I think we made it clear that we appreciate basketball, even if a lot of our own particular in-jokes and references maybe have a lot to do with it.
Yeah.
So is that about it?
I think so. I'm not sure what we're going to do next. Y'all will have to find out on Wednesday.
Yeah, we've got a lot of options we come up with.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll figure that out.
We'll get something squared away.
And then after this, I'm going to do another Stephen King video, like right after this. And there should be one that comes out before this. And then I'm getting prepared now for the big review video. It's gonna have all this, most of the stuff that's come out like on demand and streaming that I've missed. And then I think the King of Staten Island and the Five Bloods will be their own video, and then I'll do that big one as well. Because we talked about Draft House, Spike Lee's new movie came out today as well on Netflix.
Did you ever do Scoob?
It's gonna be in the big video. It'll be here. It'll be there eventually.
Yeah.
I'd say in the next week or so I'll do that big review video. So, and then King of Staten Island and the Five Bloods will be probably at the beginning of next week or something. Because I think Owen and Ashley take the weekend, and then I'll start back up again Monday. And then ours are Wednesdays and Fridays. And yeah, you know the schedule. So.
Yep.
So I guess we're done here.
I think that's it.
All right.